And rather to my surprise, he agreed almost immediately. It didn't take much persuasion at all. In fact, I said to him, he said, well, where are you releasing this report? I said, we're releasing it in Cairo. He said, why Cairo? I said, well, because it's close to Libya and there's a lot of international journalists there. He said, oh, come to Tripoli, release it there. So we said, yes, great. And then we made the arrangements. The thing was, we never knew whether it was actually going to happen until the last minute, because Libya is a very unpredictable country. And we've had some experience with it because in the last 18 months, 2 years, we've actually made three official trips to Libya to do research under our own conditions. So I was unfortunately unable to go to the press launch of this report, but three of my colleagues did so. One was our Washington, D.C. advocacy director, Tom Malinowski. The other was our director for Middle East and North Africa, Sarah Lee Whitson, and the other was Libya and Egypt researcher who actually wrote the report, Hippa Al-Murayya. And they reported back to me, and I think it's important that I should tell you a little bit about what the press conference was like, because it was actually very, very revealing. The most significant thing, I would say, about this report, albeit it's a very solid, good report, and Diana has very ably covered many of the issues that are actually in the report, and you can read the report, but the most significant thing about this report is that it was launched in Tripoli. And I think it's important for you to understand the sort of atmosphere in which it was released. As I say, we didn't actually really know whether the launch was going to go ahead until the last minute. Of the 5 journalists who had tried to get into international journalists, foreign journalists who had tried to get into Tripoli to attend our launch, only one was given a visa, and that was a journalist from the Times newspaper. Nonetheless, there are a number of representatives of international media who are based in Libya, and so they were there. As the press conference was getting underway, we heard rumors that some of the family members of the victims' family members who had heard about the press conference were trying to come to the press conference. We heard rumors that they were being stopped by the mukhabarat, by the intelligence, the secret police. But that turned out to be, well, it may have been true that they were trying to stop them, but in fact, in the end, quite a large number of family of victims of human rights abuses over the past 2 or 3 decades did turn up at the press conference, which was held in a hotel. And after we made our presentation, which had then been translated, these family members, victims of human rights abuses, started to speak. They started to tell their stories in trembling, somewhat fearful voices, but nonetheless they started to speak out. And it was an extraordinary event, because you don't do that kind of thing in Libya. You don't talk about your experience as a victim of the abuses of the regime. And we started to, and we knew that the whole thing was being watched by, very closely by the mukhabarat, by the Libyan government. But we, there was nothing we could do. They were there, they wanted to speak out, and they did. And it was a very moving experience by all accounts. But it also indicated the kind of subtle, but nonetheless, I think, important shifts that are actually taking place in Libya. And my colleague, Tom Malinowski, described it like this. He said, in Libya, the regime has a monopoly of power. It also has a monopoly of dissent. And none of this would have happened, and none of the opening that has taken place in terms of limited improvements in freedom of expressions and so forth would have taken place without first of all, a push from Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi's foundation, which is the only established organization which is able to criticize the regime with impunity, but also because of his own efforts to allow groups like Human Rights Watch to come in, to do their work, and then to report back in Libya. And it was an extraordinary and I think unprecedented event, which indicates these changes that are taking place. And those changes are to be welcomed, obviously, but first of all, it's very important to emphasize, as Diana has already done, that they're very limited and they're not irreversible. And periods of dramatic change are also usually periods of risk and uncertainty. And it's our it's our firm belief in Human Rights Watch that the best way to reduce the risk of uncertainty and instability in Libya, and to build on the very limited progress that has been made with regard to human rights, political and civil rights, is for the UK, the European Union, the United States and other actors to, in their engagement with Libya, to put human rights right at the center of their policy. That's a big ask, especially when it comes to the Middle East. Most of those actors that I've spoken about, including the UK, are not accustomed to put human rights at the heart of their policies when engaging with Middle Eastern and North African countries. But nonetheless, I think with Libya there is an opportunity to do so, and I think that they certainly should do that. Now, as I said, Diana has ably given a good description of the very limited improvements that there have been in Libya, and also of the very serious problems that remain. I just want to mention a couple of things that she didn't talk about, because we've also done quite a lot of work on migrants in Libya. There are large numbers of Africans who are escaping from wars and poverty and drought in various parts of Africa, in Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, who are coming through Libya in an effort to get to Europe, being turned back often from Europe, sent back to Libya. The Libyans are treating them with a great deal of brutality. We documented this by talking to them in Malta and elsewhere. We tried to document it in Libya, but the Libyans wouldn't allow us into migrant detention centers, but we do know that those detention centers are, in those detention centers, migrants are living under appalling conditions, facing regular beatings, torture, and often being simply being dumped in the desert where they face almost certain death. So that's a big problem. We've also reported on that in the past year, and you can see that on our website as well. I also want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the West and Libya. And again, it's important to bear in mind the context. Perhaps, Lord Ahmed, the next event we could do together would be an event on our work on UK complicity in torture in Pakistan. And
let's organise it today.
Because the UN has just published a report endorsing a piece of work that we put out at the end of November, documenting cases in which we feel very strongly that the evidence suggests that the UK was actually complicit in torture in Pakistan. Now, there is also a very important counter-terrorism element and intelligence sharing element to the recent improvement in relations between the West and Libya. And Diana has also already referred to the need for an investigation into the death of al-Libi, who I think it's important to remember was rendered from one country to another by the United States, tortured, interrogated, and eventually died in mysterious circumstances, allegedly by suicide in Libya last year. But it was on the basis of intelligence that was extracted from al-Libi under torture that in part anyway, that the US constructed the case for going to war against Saddam Hussein, and obviously we all know where that ended up. This and the UK comes in here because the UK has been seeking to deport terrorism suspects whom it does not, for one reason or another, want to put on trial in this country, to deport them to countries where they face the risk of torture, like Egypt, Jordan, and indeed Libya. And we've been opposing that. We feel that that seriously undermines the total prohibition on torture as enshrined in the UN Convention. but the UK government is continuing to press for the right to deport terrorism suspects to countries where there is a risk of them being tortured. Luckily, in the case of Libya, the British courts have prevented them from doing so up until now. But I mentioned this important counter-terrorism element because that is one of the reasons why the UK is developing, and I'll finish very quickly, has rehabilitated Libya in recent years. Now, I think the rehabilitation of Libya, it's coming back into the fold of the international community, for the want of a better expression. I don't usually like to use that expression. I think that's a positive thing, but because I think it's an opportunity